The piano. So you can hear it. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll keep this here so I don't forget it.
Thank you. All right.
Can you see the screen over there?
You have to look checklist. What sheet? Yes, that's right. Good. So when you go to the next one, you start. Yeah. How you doing?
Yeah, we're doing like the water here. Because you got a job and it's the only time I talk to you. Right. You make me feel much. Yeah, it's good. You know, Annie, we'll come look at it. When we talk, we're going to do together. Change payment. Talk about it. How's mom? You just got everything?
Well, it's 6:15. I think it's time to get started. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Good. My name is Lamone Knowles, president of City Park Friends and Neighbors, and also candidate for City Council in District 8. How are you this evening? All right. So tonight, we're doing a panel on the housing crisis and the impacts on community and parks, okay? There's a lot of concern about the 300, Initiative 300. A lot of negative information is floating out about it. Great concern to the people who are most affected. But this is not about endorsing the amendment. This is about presenting facts, actual data about the situation that people find themselves in. So tonight we have a panel. Dennis Gallagher, Aaron Goldhamer, Aaron Tafoya, and Saker, German Saker, who's going to read the actual bill. So, to get our meeting started, I'm going to have an opening by one of our poet laureates, Charles Nicholas. So would you mind coming up and reading your masterpiece?
Judges by Charles Nicholas. What judge is not indicted by the death of her career, her prosecutor's attitude still pulsing loud and clear? How many cushy internships came easily her way to lock her in the upper crust forevermore to stay? And in this corner, the accused, of whom not much is known, but even so there ought to be some facts that she should own. His mother kept him home from school till he began 3rd grade. She needed him, her baby, home, so home was where he stayed. Her older kids spoke English now. Her older kids spoke English now, she only spoke with him, and all they had in common was so witheringly grim. Her boyfriend shot his mother over breakfast one fine day, and those 2 cops who took the call just took the man away. As for the boy, he went to school, which he knew how to do. He also drank and shoplifted and got in trouble too. With 23 disturbance calls in under 7 years, he comes before her Honor's Court with not 4 words but tears. His trauma left untreated is now eating him alive. Her Honor has no notion as to why he cannot thrive.
Okay, so for CPFAN business, now normally the meeting in April is our officer and board elections, but we're going to defer it for a month until May 7th, the day of the whole citywide election. We're going to place an announcement on the CPFAN web and email to the members. Anyone who's interested in running for the board, please respond to the email, okay? We have an election committee, and that is Steve Epler, Georgia Garnsey, and Hank Boots. So if you have any questions, talk to one of them, and they can guide you on what to do. Let's see, what else do we have here? Are there any candidates for elective office in the House? Stand up and be recognized. Yes. All righty, so we're going to move on to the agenda. And I'm going to give you what the etiquette is for the forum tonight.
Hank, where's the microphone?
It's right there on the piano.
Thank you.
Listen carefully. One person speaks at a time. Respect the time limits for the questions, which is 30 seconds, and then the responses for a minute. And then hold the questions until the Q&A after all the speakers have presented. And most importantly, be kind, because sometimes it's hard to listen to things that you have preconceived notion about. And I repeat again, this is not about an endorsement of Initiative 300. So if that's what you've heard out on the street, someone told you a big lie. This is about education. Okay? So the question I have for you, Do you have any fears and concerns about recognizing our unhoused neighbors as being part of our community? Think about it, write down your answers, and save it for the Q&A at the end of the program. All right, so I'm going to hand the program, the next section, over to Bridget, and she's going to go into facts about homelessness.
So thanks for coming tonight, and we're going to sprint through this because there's a lot of information, but I'm going to try to summarize some of it so that we can get a picture of what the issues are. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so what are the similarities between housed and unhoused neighbors? Well, if you have a house, you can do things in your own house. If you're unhoused, you have to do them in public. So we all have in common a mother and a father somewhere. We all eat, we need water, we need to pee, we need to sleep, we need a home. Some of us smoke, some of us are alcoholics, and we fall asleep in our bed drunk every night. Some of us have addictions, they fall asleep on the street. Some of us have mental illness, we all have feelings. But the difference is a home. That's the main difference between the housed and the unhoused, is a home. Okay. People arrive at poverty and homelessness for many reasons. I'm sure that you can think of many yourself. Death, domestic violence, lost your job, foreclosure, whatever. But research shows that drastic cuts to low income and subsidized housing since 1983 is a cause of U.S. homelessness, not personal failures or disasters. So, why did low-income housing become scarce? Well, you can see in this slide of HUD funding that the money for subsidized housing in 1976, it sort of all went on a downhill trajectory until today. In rural areas, the problem was even worse. The funding was cut in rural areas as draconianly as it was in the urban areas. Funds for public housing development flatlined. So here is public housing development and the money for that, and the homeless assistance funding, etc. You can see it all flatlined about 1983. But there's something to be said for the Democrats too coming up here. And this goes up to 2004, but it hasn't really improved substantially since then. Excuse me. Are the feds still spending money? Yeah, like it's going out of style. So you can see the red line federal budget and the HUD budget outlays, housing and urban development for subsidizing low-income housing. What are the government priorities? Essentially, here on the second line are the public housing capital expenses, $2.58 million. A fleet destroyer costs $3.30 billion rather. Buying jets. Essentially, the government's putting the money into the military and private home ownership. You can see the federal tax expenditures for home ownership, tax deductions for mortgages and so forth went up, where the HUD budget authority went down. So the money that the government used to spend for low-income housing, subsidized housing, went away, and the funds were allocated to So percentage of federal housing subsidies by income, most of it goes to people who make over $86,000 a year. Most of the benefits for housing that the government spends. History of housing policy in the United States. It starts off here with the stock market crash in 1929, and there were 1 million homeless people. And then Roosevelt jumped in with his New Deal. This whole page is sort of all about the government spending money on the people and on low-income housing and subsidized housing. Urban renewal came in 1949, and it was marred by racial and class discrimination. In 1983, the people in the mental hospitals were deinstitutionalized, and that added to millions of homeless who hit the streets. They just went from the mental hospitals, and they were put out to the community for community-based care that was never there. So that contributed to our homeless problem. But then something happened. In the early 80s, Ronald Reagan came in, and the Great New Deal and the Great Society for Poor and Housing disappeared. And it sort of goes down from there. In 1996, Clinton did his 5-year limit on welfare, and he did forced work programs for poor people. And that also contributed to the homelessness. So it wasn't just the Republicans. The Congress jumped in, and they were complicit in cutting funds. So that's part of it. The downward trend continues today. In 1983, shelters were a temporary solution to homelessness. Everybody went, whoa, what are all these homeless people doing out here? And they used FEMA funds to set up temporary shelters and to get food to them. And what started out as a Band-Aid became a permanent solution to homelessness, and everybody forgot about building homes and instead focused more on the subgroups, the visible poor, who were littering the streets and causing consternation for business. Shelters don't work for everybody. People who work late are denied access. People with criminal histories can be excluded. No pets, no partners, no possessions, fear of violence. And 60% of shelters in the United States, believe it or not, will not accept children, will not accept families with children. Poverty in the U.S. Children are 12.8 million, women 22, blacks 9 million, that's 21% of the black population, Hispanics 10 million, white is 8%, Native American 25% of them are living in poverty, and surprisingly not, people with disabilities, almost 25% of them, 3.8 million are living in poverty. Affordable available housing, there are only 56 units for every 100 low-income people. So that can give you an idea. In Colorado, now counting the homeless is very difficult because they do a point-in-time count once a year. They go out and they see, volunteers will go out and they will see how many people they can say, say, are you homeless? And the person has to identify themselves as being homeless. So the counts are all over the board. Most organizations will say that at any one time there are probably 3.5 million people who are homeless in the United States. So in Colorado, about 11,000 homeless by official count, families, veterans, 593 are unaccompanied young adults, and 2738 are the chronic homeless. And the chronic homeless is one of the subgroups that everybody focuses on, the people who you see on the street year after year. But there are millions more that are without housing. And so sometimes those people get lost in the shuffle for what little funding there is. Denver's 10-year plan to end homelessness. 6 Denver City employees between 2003 and 2014 cost us $46 million. And who benefits? Has homelessness decreased in Denver? It has not. So, Lamone, would you like to introduce our speaker?
So Dennis Gallagher is a former auditor for the city and county of Denver, not to mention the long political history. And are you a Denver native as well? North Side? Yes. Dennis did an audit of the Denver Road Home program that was formulated under Mayor Hickenlooper, which was a 10-year plan to end homelessness on the streets of Denver. And if it had been orchestrated properly, it would have been a very successful program. However, when the new mayor came in, the program was abruptly stopped. and an audit was done of the funds. So Mr. Gallagher is going to present those findings. Come on up.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I want to thank this church for letting us in tonight to talk about this. And my own family up there in North Denver, my grandpa Gallagher lost his job on the Moffett Railroad. And they lost their little house in Tabernash, Colorado, where the family was living. And came down to Denver. And if it wasn't for the Catholic orphanages, all the Gallaghers would have been out on the street. But the girls went to St. Clair's orphanage, 26th and Osceola, and the boys went to St. Vincent's orphanage. They're still there at 41st and Lowell. So every time I go by, I think of my own family being without a home. And my grandmother worked in a building called the Weaver Block, 29th and Wyandotte, which is still there. Still there, a beautiful old Victorian building. She was the janitor and opened the doors in the morning, slept in a closet, and would go visit the kids at the orphanage on the weekends. My grandfather tried to go out of the state to find a job on a railroad somewhere that would accept him. And it took the family 2 years to get back. And friends, I got to tell you, you think that it's not mentioned anywhere in all these studies, I don't think. But whenever we had a family reunion, all the stories for the Gallaghers, it was like Angela's Ashes. Remember that book? Instead of Angela's Ashes, it was stories about the orphanage. And my Uncle John, who was a Denver fireman, along with my dad and my other uncles, he cried himself to sleep every night for 2 years. Even though the nuns at the orphanage gave him as much attention as they could, it just wasn't enough. And they finally got back together. But it affected my whole family clear into the next 3 generations. So there is an effect on families of being homeless and being without resources and not being able to cope. And I'll never forget one time I was at a conference on homelessness in Sterling, Colorado. And I went up, I think it's when I was on city council. And so I was sitting next to the Presbyterian minister, and he said, well, I said to him, what do you do when you have a homeless family up here in Sterling? We buy him a one-way bus ticket for Denver because you at least do something. We don't have anything for homeless people. And it reminded me that this is a whole metro-wide area thing, not just Denver. We should be talking about there's a tremendous number of homeless kids in Jefferson County. They go to school every day out of a car. So what kind of a society do we want to be is the question that we're asking tonight. And I think of the great philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, who was of Jewish background, living in France, born in Lithuania, and when the Nazis moved in, the French sent him to Russia and got him out. But he's the one who asked the question, who is our brother? Who is the other in our lives? And he even out Jesus is Jesus. He said, if you're eating a piece of chicken and your neighbor is starving, you give your piece of chicken over to your neighbor. And that's the question, like, who is the other in our lives here in Denver, Colorado? And this audit, let me just share with you, Hickenlooper had it running pretty well. I got to give him credit for that. But then as soon as the current administration came in, and this is 4 years old, and I would love to see the current auditor do a follow-up to see if anything was done in view of all the suggestions we made about this audit, and I don't think it has. And let me just read to you, I'm not going to get into great detail, but I just want to read for you some of the findings.
Denver's road home has failed to utilize key resources to reduce homelessness in Denver. Then they back that up. Denver's road home has not used existing data to track and demonstrate progress towards ending homelessness. These are what our auditors found. Key Denver road home documents demonstrate importance of service provider data, and they couldn't give us that. Denver's road home documented commitment to data collection and analysis. And they even hired a paid consultant, which is nothing new in our city. We'll read you more about them. Advised the Denver road home to prioritize data collection and analysis. Tell us what are you trying to do? They couldn't tell us that. And then the Denver's road home has not prioritized data collection and analysis. Indictment after indictment. Does this sound like a city that really wants to do something about homelessness when you get recommendations like this? Denver's road home is unable to demonstrate the impact of its efforts and lacks the ability to strategize for future plans. And so just listen to the indictments. The Commission to End Homelessness is not structured or managed effectively to support the efforts of Denver's road home to reduce homelessness. So here Hickenlooper had set up this homeless commission, and they were actually doing pretty well. But the current administration, people would drop off the commission and nobody got replaced. It just sort of fell into disrepair, benign neglect, I call it. And the commission lacked a clear and updated mission. They didn't even have a mission statement. The format and frequency of commission meetings failed to capitalize on member expertise. And key stakeholders are not represented on the commission. And then we make a list of people we think they ought to try to get on the commission that was doing so well. And then the next thing is other pertinent information. In an audit, you always have the suggestions and the solutions. But the page I refer you to is page 26, and you can get, if any of you want a copy of this, I'll send it to you. Denver's unauthorized camping ordinance may expose the city and the homeless population to risks. And then they go through all the different issues dealing with the current camping ban. Denver lacks adequate shelter space necessary to mitigate harm from the ordinance. So there was no preparation as to how to deal with this. Laws similar to Denver's ordinance were investigated in other cities, and they list some of the other cities here where they ran into trouble. And then they listed an Oregon Circuit Court opinion. They talked about all the constitutional problems, the 8th Amendment, guaranteeing against cruel and unusual punishment, the 14th Amendment, right to travel, and the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. And then we listed a few potential effects of the urban camping ordinance in Denver. So this is nothing new. They went into this eyes wide open. And then we list alternatives. There are other kinds of alternatives to camping ban, which we listed and suggested, but nobody ever followed up on that. And the thing is that consistent monitoring of Denver's unauthorized camping ordinance on the homeless could mitigate risk to the city. So those are basically what we found, and I got to tell you, that's why that reaction from the current administration to the homelessness is an indictment. I hope the new auditor will do a follow-up to see if anything has been done. I don't think much has been done at all. And this is all for the corporate interests. And Denver citizens are very generous. I suspect this 300 may make it through the ballot, because I could be wrong on that, even though I've received a lot of literature against it. But if it passes, it's because of the benign neglect that we see out of the current administration and that whole thing. So I just wanted to report to you on an audit that was done 4 years ago, and I hope that helps you, and helps you because it sure helped me realize I want to support somebody else for mayor. So thank you very much.
Okay, so the Denver Road Home was developed in response to a mandate by President Bush to encourage all mayors to do 10-year plans to rid homelessness, but unfortunately there was very little, if any, funding attached to that challenge. So this is about the vicious cycle of homeless poverty, of homeless policy. It continued to increase homelessness. Premise homelessness is primarily caused by deficiencies of homeless individuals, stereotypes of homeless people as deviant and degenerate, ever-changing policy flavors geared toward fixing different target subject populations like the chronic illness or chronic people or addicts or drunks or whatever. Periodic calls for local homeless plans based upon the newest policy, temporary local response to homelessness that fail to address the systemic causes, which is there aren't enough houses. So that's kind of clicky. So visible and invisible house people. The visible house, the visible unhoused neighbors are the ones who they mostly see living downtown. They annoy the business owners and civic leaders. No place to go, and they sleep in the streets. The invisible unhoused neighbors live in your neighborhoods. They work in your office, your schools, and your hospitals. They couch surf. They sleep in shelters. They live in cars, they live in dumpsters and storage units, or they double up. So the homeless or the unhoused neighbors that you see are just a small fraction of the people who suffer from homelessness. Civic strategy to get rid of homeless, criminalizing homelessness. Criminalizing basic life-sustaining activities in public. Think about it, if you couldn't pee, if you had to get up and pee in the middle of the night and there was no place to pee, what would you do? If you need to defecate, there's no toilets. There are no public toilets open 24 hours a day in Denver. If you happen to go into the park to use the porta potty in Civic Park, after 11 you're breaking the curfew. So the whole thing is sort of set up to keep people moving and to penalize them. So what happens when the life-sustaining activities in public are not allowed? Well, their elimination, they forbid elimination, asking for help, lying or sitting, loitering, bathing, sleeping, sheltering, covering up. And we all know about the stories about the sweeps in Denver, especially in the dead of winter, where they remove blankets and tents and shelters from people and just leave them stranded. Click. There's no place to go. Trying to make homelessness invisible only makes it inevitable. Move on to where? Orders to move on cause sleep deprivation and exhaustion. A lot of the homeless people are just exhausted. A lot of them work. 40% of them work. And can you imagine trying to get to work in the morning, to get your transportation, to get yourself clean, to be able to get to work, to, if you're exhausted and you've been, asked to keep moving along all night. So it's sort of like the baton death march, it's not really, doesn't do anything to get rid of homeless, it just sort of, I don't know. Violence against homelessness, rape, assaults on women especially. The people get pushed away from service centers and they get pushed out into places where you can't see them or into the suburbs. Loss of protective community, loss of jobs. In 2014 to 17, over 12,000 move-on orders were issued by the Denver police. And it is very difficult because they don't keep good records to know really what the situation is. I spent the last 2 weeks reading reports from law schools in Seattle and Yale, Denver, all kinds of statistics about homelessness, trying to inform this presentation so that we would have an idea of what we're facing. MoveOn does nothing to stop homelessness and wastes millions of taxpayer dollars. Do you know how much money that the city spends on enforcement and incarcerating people? It's pretty amazing, and it does nothing except we have more homeless. So. Denver has 15 ordinances that criminalize homelessness. An arrest or citation for a homeless person, when the police come up and say move on, and if they decide to issue a citation, that person has to appear in court, they have to do a paperwork. The odds are pretty good that they're not even going to be able to make it, in which case a bench warrant is issued for them, and then they go to jail. And then they're even deeper into the cycle of poverty. So they give unrealistic fines. If you have no money and your fine is $999, well, you're going to be in jail. Warrants for arrest if you miss court date, and how does the court know where to get a hold of you if you don't have an address? Jail time for trivial infractions, disqualified for shelter, jobs, and education, which is a big one. Once you have a criminal record, you are doomed. Lost time from work, lost jobs and housing, and you can also be disqualified for social services. So society pretty much abandons you because you arrived at homelessness. In 2014 to 2017, Denver issued 11,000 citations to homeless people. Criminalization of homelessness, they say, ensures a lifetime of poverty. So this is the anti-camping ordinance. This is a little clip. Let's see.
A partial victory this evening for the ACLU and the homeless. Mayor Michael Hancock is changing the city's camping ban enforcement. It comes after this video showing Denver police officers taking blankets from people left out in the cold. The mayor has directed Denver police not to take tents and blankets through the end of April. The ACLU still wants the city to stop its sweeps of homeless camps and to suspend its camping ban for the winter. A partial victory this evening for the ACLU and the home.
Okay, so I was fascinated to start reading about a homeless rights revolution. In Yale Law School, Seattle Law School, DU, they're talking about the state of the struggle for rights for homeless people, for unhoused neighbors. And it is happening all over the country. Puerto Rico was the first for a survival bill of rights in 1998. Rhode Island was the first mainland state in 2012, and others have followed. They all sort of guarantee different rights, different enforcement mechanisms. Some are judicial, some are administrative. But it is an evolving area of the law. Many of the provisions in the anti-homeless laws have been found unconstitutional by various courts around the country. So anti-homeless laws like Jim Crow laws, ugly laws, which were mostly against disabled people. If you looked freaky in public, you had to leave. Jim Crow laws, Okie laws, who remembers the Grapes of Wrath? Okie, get out of town. So the anti-homeless initiatives or ordinances, the legal scholars sort of see those as connected to these struggles as well. But even when you have a judicial hearing in your favor, it still takes decades, if ever, to get equality. So our next special speaker is Aaron Goldhammer, who is an associate at Keating, Wagner, Pedori, Polidori. At Free, he was the kind soul who offered to represent City Park Golf Course in the lawsuit, pro bono, for free, and he spent many days and weeks and months working on that. So Aaron.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Bridget. I want to start with two quotations. One that I just sort of happened across when I was preparing for this that I thought was apt. It's from Charles Blow. It states, "One doesn't have to operate with great malice to do great harm. The absence of empathy and understanding are sufficient." The next quotation that I'd like to read you actually appears at the beginning of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals opinion in the Martin v. City of Boise case that found a a urban camping ban very similar to Denver's to be unconstitutional. Most of the time, these legal opinions are very dry and very boring, and I get to read them all day. But this opinion started with a quotation, which is a little unusual for an opinion, but it's from Anatole, France. It says, "The law, in its majestic equality, forbids rich and poor alike to sleep under bridges, to beg in the streets, and to steal their bread." Which I thought was an interesting little flourish for this opinion. This opinion was actually affirmed yesterday. When you have a federal appeals court, you start with a panel of 3 judges, and if the issue is sort of important enough and interesting enough, once you get your first opinion, you can petition for a rehearing of your case with the entire Court of Appeals. I believe that's 12 or 13 Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judges. And so they, just yesterday, reaffirmed this holding that the City of Boise's camping ban was unconstitutional. And this, is analyzed, as I believe was mentioned before, under the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which reads, in its entirety, "Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted." So how this amendment has been interpreted, there's sort of 3 different areas that you get into. First, the amendment limits the type of punishment the government may impose. Second, it prescribes punishment, it forbids punishment grossly disproportionate to the severity of the crime. And third, it places substantive limits on what the government may criminalize. And it's that last factor that is sort of most active in these kinds of cases. The precedents that sort of came before this included a determination that it was unconstitutional to criminalize merely the status of being addicted to, I believe it was heroin-like substances. That was determined to be an unconstitutional punishment, criminalization of status. And so from that case, there has been a lot of case law that has developed as to the unhoused, because it very much is a criminalization of status in a lot of cases. This principle, according to the opinion, compels the conclusion, and I'm quoting here, that the 8th Amendment prohibits the imposition of criminal penalties for sitting, sleeping, or lying outside in public property for homeless individuals who cannot obtain shelter. These are sittings, lying, and sleeping are defined as acts or conditions. Whether they are defined as acts or conditions, they are universal and unavoidable consequences of being human. And the conduct at issue is involuntary and inseparable from status in these cases. They are one and the same, given that human beings are biologically compelled to rest, whether by sitting, lying, or sleeping. And as a result, just as the state may not criminalize the state of being homeless in public places. I lose my mic, that's all right. I'll speak up. The state may not, thank you. The state may not criminalize conduct that is an unavoidable consequence of being homeless, namely sitting, lying, or sleeping in the streets. There's further discussion of this in the opinion that states the effect, as other courts have observed and this court adopted, Resisting the need to eat, sleep, or engage in other life-sustaining activities is impossible. Avoiding public places when engaging in this otherwise innocent conduct is also impossible. As long as the homeless plaintiffs do not have a single place where they can lawfully be, the challenged ordinances, as applied to them, effectively punish them for something for which they may not be convicted under the 8th Amendment, sleeping, eating, and other innocent conduct. This Boise case was interesting in my view because it found that it was unconstitutional despite the fact there was evidence in the record that the homeless shelters in Boise never reported being completely full. And that's often an argument that is deployed in these sorts of disputes. There is shelter space available. We're never completely full. Therefore, you do have an option to go to a shelter. Therefore, you're not being compelled to conduct basic human activities in public. So that's sort of a standard argument. What was interesting in this case was that the judge, the trial court, and then the appellate court really looked at the extent to which there's effective access to shelter space. In the Boise case, there were a couple shelters, some of which had certain religious requirements. You had to get involved with a religious program. There were others where if you didn't get on the list right away at a certain time, you may not be able to get in, and then you'd have to go across town to get somewhere else, and they may have closed their cutoff times for access there. There were a number of sort of issues about the practical access to shelter that I think are certainly would be relevant in Denver if the camping ban was challenged as unconstitutional. Some of these access issues were mentioned earlier, but there are certain age restrictions, gender restrictions, family restrictions. Some scholarship shows certainly that there's plenty of people experiencing homelessness who have PTSD, and it would be medically inappropriate for them to be housed in a shelter setting surrounded by all kinds of folks. Certainly there's issues with people with disabilities accessing all kinds of shelter space, or being able to crawl down off of wherever they're ambulating or from a wheelchair onto a cot on the floor or a mat on the floor, whatever it might be. There could be sobriety requirements. Certainly the physical locations throughout the city can pose a challenge. People who are transgender have issues with which gender-segregated shelter they're supposed to go to. There may be bed bugs. There are folks who work nights, certainly, and there's plenty of restrictions on the worldly possessions that you can bring in as well. So there's going to be, if this was ever challenged in court, the Denver law, the simple refrain that the shelter beds are available and are never completely full may not be the end of the discussion to practical access to shelter. One thing I wanted to note, I'm sure plenty of people have copies here, but I've got a copy of the Initiative 300, the Rights to Survive.
It's on the screen.
Oh, there it is. There has been some expressed concern, and this might be of particular interest to this group, that 300 would essentially repeal park curfew restrictions. There's no statement concerning park curfews in Initiative 300. There is a statement that laws that are inconsistent with 300 would be repealed. However, there is still the ability of the city to restrict access to areas of the public that exists right now. And so I do not think, and I know that the courts tend to be fairly deferential to the powers that be as far as zoning laws and the Denver Charter and the parks manager's power to control the parks. It does not seem to me that you would see a successful challenge to park curfew restrictions simply by virtue of 300 passing. So that's a little bit from the Legal Eagle, and thanks so much for hanging in there with some intense legal stuff.
Thank you. So a few years ago, I worked for the City and County of Denver as a victim advocate with Denver Police. And not only did I deal with crime victims, I also dealt with people who were in distress. I was on call one Saturday. An officer needed help with a family who was living in their car close to Denver Health. Apparently, the neighbors reported the car because it was parked in the alley behind someone's garage. And the officer, when he talked to this family, they would move their car every day because him and his wife worked and the kids went to school. But on this particular Saturday, the wife was pregnant and was experiencing labor pains. So when the officer called me, I told him to hurry up and get the whole family down to Denver Health, and I would meet them down there. Luckily, she was in false labor, but that's when I became acutely aware of homeless folk, working folk, without homes, living in their cars, taking care of their kids. So this is a real deal. I work at the VA hospital, and I also found out that several of my co-workers were homeless, and they were living in their cars, and these are veterans. So something has got to be done by the city, by the federal and the state, to take care of our people. These are taxpayers. These are not criminals. These are people who are just in a bad situation for the time being. So anyway, right now what I want to do is have Chairman Sekou come up and read the wording for Initiative 300. And then from there, we'll go into the speakers. And I'll introduce them after we finish with Chairman Sekou. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody's tired of work. Okay. First of all, thank everyone for taking out the time tonight to really explore the facts and not the stories. And then what's going to be very important is that once we have had a conversation around the facts, we must share the facts with our friends and neighbors, no matter where we go. Because this thing is going to be really, really interesting. And so I'm not supposed to say I'm for or against this thing, but just read the facts. And then from there, folks make up your own mind. And then pay attention to the stories that are coming, because there's some stuff going on that is not true. It's not true. So here we go. Here it is. And you guys can get copies of this thing. I'm sure that Therese has copies of this actual piece. It's on the back table. And so here we go. Because it's not, you don't have to be a legal eagle to read this thing and understand this thing. Okay? For folks who are having problems reading it, get Webster's Dictionary, Black Law's Dictionary, and define the words you don't get. because we all have a certain level of intelligence in this room, I believe. So here we go. Let me get my glasses here. The Denver Right to Survive Initiative. A law securing and enforcing basic rights for all people within the city and county of Denver, including the right to rest and shelter oneself from the elements in a non-obstructive manner in public spaces, to eat, share, accept, or give food in any public space where food is not prohibited, to occupy one's own legally parked motor vehicle, or occupy a legally parked motor vehicle belonging to another with the owner's permission, and to have a right and expectation of privacy and safety of or in one's person and property. Anybody got a problem with that? Anybody understand that? Read too fast or slow?
No.
Okay, good. If I go too fast or slow, just holler. Be it enacted and ordained by the people of the city and county of Denver. Section 1. The revised municipal code of Denver, Colorado, Title 1, Chapter 28, is hereby amended to include a new Article 9, Chapter 8, Human Rights. Article 9, right to survive in public places, spaces. Section 28-254, protected rights of the people. A, purpose. The purpose of this section is to secure and enforce basic rights for all people within the jurisdiction of the city and county of Denver, including the right to rest and shelter oneself from the elements in a non-obstructive manner in public spaces, to eat, share, accept, or give food in any public space where food is not prohibited, to occupy one's own legally parked motor vehicle, or occupy a legally parked motor vehicle belonging to another with the owner's permission, and to have a right and expectation of privacy and safety of or in one's person and property. A, definition. 1, public space. Public space means any outdoor property that is owned or leased, in whole or in part, by the city and county of Denver, and is accessible to the public or any city property upon which there is an easement or for public use. 2, rest. Rest means the state of not moving and holding certain postures, including but not limited to sitting, standing, leaning, kneeling, squatting, sleeping, or lying down. 3, non-obstructive manner means a manner which does not render passageways impassable or hazardous. 4, motor vehicle means and includes vehicles defined in the Colorado Revised Statute Section 42-1, 102, parentheses 58, camper coach 42-1-102, parentheses 113, close parentheses, trailer coach 42-1-102, parentheses 106A, close parentheses, or non-commercial or recreational vehicles 42-1-102, parentheses 61, close parentheses, period. 5, ceilings preemption means any limitation on local lawmaking that limits the amount of protection local laws may extend to municipal residents that exceed state or federal protections. 6, municipal subordination means any exercise of Dillon rules, pre-exemption, or other mechanisms used to assert the right of the people of Denver to use their city and county government for the protection of resident rights. C. Rights. The right to rest in a non-obstructive manner in public spaces. 2. Right to shelter oneself from the elements in a non-obstructive manner in outdoor public spaces. 3. The right to eat, share, accept, or give free food in any public space where food is not prohibited. 4. The right to occupy one's own legally parked vehicle that is motorized or occupy a legally parked motor vehicle belonging to another with the owner's permission. 5. The right and expectation of safety and privacy of or in one's person and belongings while occupying public spaces. 6. The right to have the city and county government of Denver enforce and defend this law on the basis that a constitutional right of initiative, which is an expression of local community self-government that exists, and this law is an assertion of that right as it seeks to expand and secure the rights of the people of Denver. The exercise of the legal doctrines of Dillon Rule, sealing preemptions, or municipal subordinations in state government would unconstitutionally and illegitimately violate the right of the resident of the city county of Denver to local community self-government. D. Prohibitions and obligations. It shall be unlawful for the city and county of Denver to enforce any ordinance, resolution, regulation, rule, or policy that limits, prohibits, or penalizes the rights to secure by this ordinance. 2. It shall be unlawful for any public law enforcement officer, private security, employee, or agent, corporation, business, or other entities to violate the rights recognized and secured by this law. 3. It shall be unlawful for any employee or agent of any government agency, corporation, business, or other entity to harass, terrorize, threaten, or intimidate any natural person exercising the rights secured by this ordinance. E. Enforcement. Any law enforcement officer or agent of the city and county of Denver who detains, causes to move, or violate the protected rights in Section C of this ordinance has committed a civil rights violation under the color of law. This prohibition includes, but is not limited to, requesting identification by any person unless supported by reasonable suspicion of a crime. 2. The City and County of Denver or any resident of the City and County of Denver may enforce the rights and prohibitions of this law through an action brought in any court possessing jurisdiction over activities occurring within the city and county. In such an action, the City and County of Denver or resident shall be entitled to recover as a prevailing party all costs of litigation, including, without limitation, expert and attorney fees. Wait, that's all good. This is it. 3. All laws adopted by the legislature of Colorado shall be the law of the City and County of Denver, only to the extent that they will not violate the rights or prohibitions of this law. The state or federal law is more protective of human rights and civil rights than this law. The state or the federal law controls. Severability. 1. The provisions of this law are severable. If any court decides that any section, clause, sentence, part, or provision of this law is illegal, invalid, or unconstitutional, such decision shall not affect, impair, or invalidate any of the remaining sections, clauses, sentences, part, or provisions of the law. This law would have been enacted without the invalid sections. G. Repealer. all inconsistent provisions of prior laws adopted by the city and county of Denver are hereby repealed, but only to the extent necessary to remedy inconsistencies. H, effective date. All provisions of this act shall take effect immediately, enacted and ordained 7th day of May 2019 by the city and county of Denver. Now, I just have a brief comment on this from my own personal experience. I have experienced homelessness over an extended period of time because I was gentrified out of my neighborhood with a Section 8 voucher that was not accepted anywhere in the city for 4 years. And HUD attempted to take the voucher from me after waiting for almost 7 years to get it because I couldn't use it. And what they wanted me to do was to live outside the city and county of Denver. Well, at this stage in my life, I'm a little bit too old for that. And the neighborhood they wanted me to move into was Littleton. Well, I was born and raised here in the 5 Points. I already know what's going on in Littleton. Ain't no sense even talking about it. Ain't no black folks out there, one. You have a lot of Aryan Nation and subgroups like that who are graffitiing the shopping centers and whatnot. I'm not going through that. Not at this stage in my life. And I don't need that kind of stress, for real. So, after taking it to different places that Mile High Health Center of Denver was given this thing to do the housing part for me, because I have a disability. And so, after sending me to over 100 places, starting with that homeless place downtown, coalition stuff, all right, and going through that whole process, of sending me to places that, first of all, didn't accept the voucher. Second of all, didn't have any partners that they could send me to. I went around and around and around and around and around and around in the back. So I went down to city council because I was working with them. I've been working with them for the last 12 years. And I shared with them in a public meeting and in subcommittees that I needed some help with this thing. Not one stepped up there. Not one. Not one. And rightly so. Because I wasn't necessarily one of their best friends. Because I've been very critical of city council as a body and how they address the community. Okay? So, one day, it dawned on me, he said, you know what, I'm through. Because I had to go to a court hearing in a week that was going to determine whether I kept it or not. So I said, okay, here we go. Peter principle. I got to take it above the people who I've been working with, because obviously they don't get it. So I went over there to the feds, and there was a lady over there named Susan Fine. And she was the deputy director of Section 8 for the region. And I didn't have no appointment, I did nothing. I just came in there, and I said, I need to talk to the executive director. And so I sat there, because I didn't have no appointment, and I caught her walking out the room. And I said, hold up, I need to talk to you for a second. She said, well, I got much time. I said, I need 2 seconds. She said, 2 seconds? I said, 2 seconds. And I walked to the overhead. So we talked on the way down. She said, look, come back and see me at 1 o'clock this afternoon, and I will have you a place. So I came back 1 o'clock, because I had told her, look, if I don't get this thing done today, everybody gonna explain this to the press of why I got a voucher that ain't no good in the city county of Denver. I've been gentrified out of my building on the 5 Points where I grew up, because they jacked up the rent so high that the voucher was no good. And it was done by a 12-step Christian program. So I come back, and she says, okay, this is what I need you to do. Just sit there for a minute, I'm going to go in my office, I'll make a phone call, I'll be right back. In 15 minutes, she had a place for me at Dahlia Square Brought $99 to get in there. No credit checks, nothing. And I was good to go. After 4 years, one phone call, 15 minutes, and I'm in. No credit check, nothing. And that's the politics of what's happening here. Because most poor people don't understand how to play the game. That's right. And so that's all that's really happening. All right, and Dennis, you're right. You're absolutely right. And a lot of people don't know who I am, really. See, I'm a trained auditor and accountant that has a degree in accounting, and I was a Ford Foundation Scholar at the University of Denver. Yeah. So it's not about the education. It's not about who you know or what you know. It's about the participation that we got to open this thing up and make it happen. Now, this one here is not just about the law. Once you get this in, it is done or not done, guess what? It's not open. Because you're going to have to enforce this thing. See? You're going to have to enforce it. And then you're going to have a budget for the enforcement. And you're going to have a city council and a mayor that's going to be vigilant to make sure that the spirit of the law is done. Do y'all get that? Because otherwise, my grandfather said, and I close with this, a law ain't worth a bucket of spit unless you enforce it. Thank you very much.
Ian would like to go first.
Thank you, Chairman Sekou. So now we're going to move on with the best part of the program, which we're going to open up the floor. We're going to have speakers come up, and then we're going to have a panel with question and answer. And instead of me running around trying to give the mic to everybody, you're going to line up here in the middle. I'll give the mic to you. You can ask questions of whoever you want. Ian Tafoya of the Colorado Latino Forum. Where are you? There you are. We're also going to hear from Therese Howard of Homeless Out Loud, Hank Boots and Steve Epler, board members of CPFAN, and Don Howard, Disability Community Coalition.
Great.
These are just 3 to 5 minutes.
That's fine.
Good.
Again, my name is Ian Thomas Tafoya. I know a lot of people here. I just want to give a background on who I am with more than just the Colorado Latino Forum. I worked for both this mayor and the city council and left my job in 2015 to run for city council in opposition to the highway expansion, which I've been teamed up with you all on for many years, and in opposition to the homeless camping ban, which I believe was unconstitutional, immoral, and just plain wrong. I am a member of CPFAN. I was a District 9 city councilman, or candidate, and I do housing. I'm the co-chair of housing for the Colorado Latino Forum. I recently was appointed to the Anti-Displacement Network with the City and County of Denver, and I do serve as the co-chair of zoning and planning, of which which CPFAN is a member. I have been diligent in pushing both on the Blueprint Task Force for solutions in the plans for affordable housing, homelessness, and rapid rehousing. I was fortunate to receive an award from the Denverite for my housing work. And just to top it all off, I was the vice president of the Denver Parks Board. And so I'm planning to speak from a parks advocate standpoint. And I'm not afraid of this. I believe that they are using fear as a tool to target people. Prior to the camping ban before 2012, the majority of the homeless were concentrated near the services downtown. Well, the downtown Denver plan and the expansion of Outpost Square has drastically increased the amount of people who live there. And they have brought in the downtown business partnership as a purveyor of keeping the streets clean and privatizing security to move people away on behalf of these high taxpayer dollars. This problem with the security downtown extends beyond just the downtown partnership and even into the regional transportation district. If you're unaware, a man who was profiled as being homeless, though he was not, an African-American man, was beaten mercilessly by private security, by RTD. There actually are investigations going there, more than 3 security firms there, let alone the ones that are downtown. I do not believe that this will stand up in court and I believe that in 8 years there have been broken promises about the revenue that was going to be put towards finding solutions. When I ran on trees, trash, and transportation, there was a large conversation around public water fountains, public restrooms, and decent and basic public infrastructure for throwing away and managing our waste. Most of us have access to all of these things unless we're being profiled. And I had an opportunity to travel to a festival not too long ago in Arizona. And I was with my backpack just looking for a place to charge my phone and go to the restroom, and I was about to be a paying customer, but I was profiled. I believe this law is not about finding a solution to homelessness, but this is about securing basic human rights and ensuring equal access to public space and ensuring that government officials do not discriminate based on their own illusions of who you are and what you're about. I see very little difference between this, no public restrooms and no blacks allowed or no Mexicans allowed. These people are allowed to make a decision about whether you are in a suit and covering yourself with a blanket in the park, which is technically illegal, or they have a chance to engage with you. I would call that unconstitutional stop and frisk. There's been more than 12,000 encounters with the homeless since this camping ban was passed. Now, they'll say they didn't get very many tickets about camping, but how many tickets did they get for everything else now they were brought into a dragnet of government terrorism, really? If you're not doing anything wrong but sitting, lying, kneeling, sitting, offering food to somebody, do you really need to be asked for your ID? To me, that's just plain discrimination, and it needs to stop. Now, I do want to point out that Dennis Gallagher talked about the creation of the Homeless Commission. If we go back to 2012, when Mayor Hancock and Albus Brooks decided to pass this draconian law, they skipped the Homeless Commission. Those people who were actually involved and engaged for more than 10 years in trying to solve this problem were not made aware of this ordinance until it went to council and was voted on. Now, I believe there are many solutions to the housing. I don't believe that underwriting luxury glut, which the mayor has suggested, is an answer. I do believe that the funds from Caring for Denver will help find solutions for those that are dealing with mental health crisis. What we do know is that Housing for All works. It's worked in other places, and it's worked in other cities. You know, the Civilian Conservation Corps created so many great things, including Red Rocks. I was just in Shenandoah Park where they took the unhoused and gave them jobs. You know, there's a big conversation right now around the Green New Deal. I think the opportunity to put people into housing and offering them jobs is something that works. Now, there is a privilege for those who can afford to go camping. If you can make it to a state park, if you can make it to a federal park, you're provided with restrooms, trash, and security, rangers. Now, if you're lucky enough to be privileged to go through the Greenway Foundation, you can also pull a permit and camp while they're discriminating those who don't have access. I think a short-term solution may be an authorized camping location that provides services. Now, we won recently in a class action lawsuit against. We settled it. I think we won. We settled in the class action lawsuit for the destruction of property. And in it, we get lockers, we get public restrooms, and we get water fountains and trash infrastructure. The fear that's being used about how the homeless behave is because of the lack of services that are being provided to them, but are being provided to everybody else. And so I don't like seeing anybody have their possessions destroyed, and that to me is probably the best part about this entire thing. I mean, obviously covering yourself when it's 10 degrees outside just makes sense, but when they come and they take your blankets and they take your tents, they leave you to die. They're literally saying that you're not worth a tent, that their access is more important. And we've been getting into some epic battles, and I've been one of the people who's got a chance to go talk to the park's people, and that's why I'm here today. This ordinance will not violate park curfew as we interpret it. I am a festival promoter and have worked on many, many festivals in these Denver parks. I don't believe the fear that this is going to shut down City Park Jazz. And lastly, in my closing, I would just say this is an initiative. And if we've learned anything about the 300s in the last 10 years, the council's willing to make tweaks. But I don't believe if we don't pass this, that we will go another 10 years without finding any solutions. And this might force the hand of those to do it because we drastically need it. Now, our opposition has raised a lot of money. And the Downtown Partnership and the Realtors Association are among the largest donors. I just want to point out these are also the same people who have solutions to the problems. They have the money to pay living wages. They could assist in helping with rent control. And they've opposed, in writing, the linkage fee, which was the amount of money that was used for new development to build housing. So while they oppose this and say we can do better, they oppose every other solution that's been brought forward by people. So, as I said, I invite you to vote with the over 10,000 people who signed yes to this position to put it on the ballot, with the ACLU and the Denver Democrats, who endorse this in more than 70%. It's polling like it's going to pass. I hope you choose compassion with us. Thank you.
Okay, I want to bring up Hank Boots. Is he here? And followed by Steve Epler. These are our board members from CPFAN.
Hi, I want to thank everybody for speaking. I think Ian was eloquent, and I agree with quite a bit of what he says. What I don't agree with is that passing this initiative is going to help homeless people a whole bunch. And leaving that to someone else to decide, I want to point out City Park Friends and Neighbors, hosting group here. Yeah, we are concerned about City Park. That's what our name suggests. Fact is that tonight there are people sleeping in the park. I ride by them every day in the morning, and they seem to be pretty discreet. I count 7 different camps. Am I okay with 7 camps? I'm not okay with 700. I don't know who's right about a park curfew. City attorney says the park curfew will be unenforceable. Ian says, don't worry about it. I like Ian. I have a lot of trust in him. But it will be a judge that decides if there's a park curfew or not. There's not somebody in this room that's going to decide that. I see the libraries, particularly downtown, used as housing for homeless people. I don't blame them for wanting to be warm and having water. I see the jail, as we've heard, being the big mental health hold facility for Denver County. And I can't think it's paranoid to worry about the parks becoming a little more comfortable for people that don't have housing. That's not housing. That's not solving their problem, letting them sleep out in a park. Solving their problem is, the blame has been placed already. The last 10 years, the city government has done squat. There's one freaking trailer downtown once in a while for people to use for a bathroom. I go by it. Well, we're not going to get a lot more of those out of 300, and I just don't think it deserves support at this time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker is Steve Epler, board member of CPFAN.
Yeah. My perspective is different. My background is in medicine. I put together a handout.
We can't hear you unless you
Here you go.
Hi. My name is Steve Epler. My perspective on this is different. I'm certainly not going to defend the city. I think this whole thing is developed because people are outraged because nothing's been done. And I think we have a real problem with homelessness. But I do have things to fear. And I want to speak to those just a minute. I think there's really significant public health dangers. And specifically, hepatitis A. Let's talk about that for a second. Hepatitis A is a virus. It's spread, it's a very hardy virus. It can live for years in the soil. It's heat and cold tolerant. It replicates or grows in liver cells, and that's why it causes hepatitis. And it can cause, you get over it with your immune system, but the immune system also damages the liver. You basically ingest the virus, and that's how you get it. But the other way you can get it is by IV drugs. So if you're infected, you can give it to somebody else. And if you ingest hepatitis virus, it becomes detectable in the stool and in the blood after about 10 days, and at that point you're infectious. You become symptomatic at 2 to 7 weeks, and the symptoms are typically worse with age. About 75% of adults become symptomatic, whereas if you're under 2 years, 90% are asymptomatic, don't have any symptoms at all. But in adults, about 25% are asymptomatic. Many people have a subclinical illness, and they just ache a lot, like flu. They may become jaundiced. People don't usually die of it. Only overall, about 0.3% of people die. But if you get older, and you're older than 50, it's up to 1.8%. Now, why is this relevant? It's relevant because there was an epidemic in San Diego County, and it caused a public health emergency. And this lasted from November of 2016 until February of 2018. It was the largest epidemic of hepatitis in the U.S. in the past 25 years. There were 580 cases. The mortality rate was 3.4%. 20 people died of this illness. And these findings are from the San Diego Grand Jury report. And the references here are all references because Bridget wanted me to make sure I spoke to facts. And actually this spread out of LA, it spread out of San Diego, it spread into LA and a whole lot of other counties in California, but the death toll in San Diego was 20. And there have been similar epidemics elsewhere, and on each occasion they've been associated with homelessness, homeless camps, IV drug abuse, and there is no association with contaminated food, which is ordinarily what causes it to be spread in communities. The strategy to get rid of it was vaccination, sanitation, by that breaking up the homeless camps, bringing toilets and hand washing facilities, which Ian already commented on, and also education, to stop people from sharing needles and things like that. But there's been other problems in a lot of other states, including Ohio and Kentucky and Louisiana. And things are so out of control in San Francisco, they have an app, a phone app. You can take a picture of a pile of poop, it automatically sends it to 311, and people in hazmat stuff show up and power wash the area with bleach. They've also had trouble with typhus, which is a louse-borne disease. The louses basically live in cats and rats and mice, and they're endemic in the LA area. Normally this disease is seen in undeveloped countries in Central America, but it's rampant in the LA area, and they've had to replace all the carpet in the city hall because it became also contaminated. And there's a whole lot of other health problems associated with homelessness, some of which have been touched on. Other forms of hepatitis, sexually transmitted diseases, HIV, tuberculosis, cirrhosis, things like COPD and pneumonia that are associated with being just out and exposed. And also trauma associated with just violence of living on the street. There's also all the mental health issues. All these things are treatable and shorten people's lives. But one of the problems of the Initiative 100 is actually the right to be left alone. Setting aside the issues that whether or not you're entitled to have any privacy in public places, which I think is certainly a legal issue which can be debated. This initiative creates a civil rights crime if the safety and privacy of an individual occupying public place is disturbed by any law enforcement, private security employee, agent, corporation, business, or other entity to harass, not define, terrorize, not define, threaten or intimidate any natural person exercising the rights secured by this ordinance.
Steve, we have like 4 other speakers, and it's all.
I'll make it fast, but in any case, it creates legal risk for the city. In your packet, there's a presentation from the city attorney that analyzes this, and one of the problems is that it creates huge barriers to providing services to this population. For example, if somebody's unconscious due to a drug overdose, what are you supposed to do? If you give them Narcan and they wake up, they're going to be angry as hell at you for getting them out of their deal. You could easily get sued. If you look at Seattle and some other areas, they don't intervene at all, and they have more trouble with overdoses. I don't think this is going to help the people with the homeless situation. I don't think it's going to help with their health. And it also is not going to create any shelter for them. There's no provision for that. I don't think living on the streets is shelter. I think that there's real problems, I think, with the shelter situation in Denver that needs to be addressed. There are lots of needs that need to be met. And finally, you're correct that the Together Denver people is composed of realtors and CRL, which is a lobbying firm, and lawyers in the business community. But there's other people who are also speaking out against this agenda. And many of them work with the homeless community themselves. This includes the Catholic Charities of Denver, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and they have a particularly good explanation for why they're not in favor of it and what they recommend on their website. I refer you to it. The Dolores Project, the Denver Rescue Mission, the Gathering Place, St. Francis Center, the Salvation Army, Urban Peak, and Volunteers of America. I think we can do better than this ordinance. I think we've got a real problem. I think it deserves real solutions. I don't see the Hancock administration as moving forward in this. And I think we need to do something different.
Okay, our last 2 speakers. Therese Howard with Homeless Out Loud and Don Howard, Disability Community Coalition. Are you ladies still in the house?
Yes.
Okay. There you go.
No. So much has been said already, so I'm not going to repeat. And I know that we're sticking on a 3-minute time frame. We're trying. So my name is Therese Howard. I'm an organizer with Denver Homeless Out Loud. I've been doing work on the streets with folks who are homeless for the past 7 years. And I want to say a few things about kind of why people are where they are. Because I think one of the misunderstandings that is pretty prevalent is sort of an assumption that because something is legal, therefore people are going to do it. There are reasons why people stay in the places that they stay and do the things that they do. A lot of this has to do with safety, with community, with access to resources. So when we talk about a lot of the fears that are out there, I think the first thing that we need to do is ask ourselves, what are the actual reasons why someone would be there? Is that actually a safe and accessible and dignified place for someone to be? So one of those places that we hear a lot about is the Denver Zoo. The opposition is saying that this initiative will lead people to living in the Denver Zoo.
This is one of the many points that I think are important to realize of how crazy the rhetoric is out about this initiative. And it is important also to ask ourselves, why are we trusting the city attorney now when in the past there has been a lot of distrust of the city attorney? So should we really be trusting the city attorney in their analysis of this is a pretty critical question. So, talking about health consequences, we're about to come out with a report. We surveyed over 500 people on the streets who are homeless about health and safety effects related to move-on orders and the police interactions, the criminalization activity. That report is scathing. You can get the actual stats from it when it comes out on the 13th, so I do encourage you to come. But what the findings of this are is that sleep deprivation among folks who are homeless sleeping on the streets and who have more police interaction is astronomical. Frostbite, also disproportionately affected by folks who are sleeping on the streets and have more police interactions, are moved on more frequently. These types of health consequences are not the result of people flooding to the streets and saying, we want to be homeless and live out on the streets, and we want to live in encampments because that sounds fun. These are the results of a tragic situation in our society that has forced people into these situations. So when we're talking about some of the scenarios that were brought up earlier regarding LA and Seattle and so on, there's a lot to say, but we need to start. The thing that I respond to first is, isn't it tragic that we live in a society where these health consequences are the reality? And who is affected by this most? It's folks who are forced to live on the streets. And what is the answer to that? It's basic health and sanitation resources for folks who are on the streets in these situations. The ways in which we can help folks who are able to have a little bit more stability and stay somewhere with their basic survival gear are tremendously higher than the ways in which folks are struggling by being pushed here and there and here and where and there in the homeless whack-a-mole that we see happen in our city right now. So I think it's really hard to grasp when you don't have experience living on the streets or seeing the way that people move around and why this plays out. But I think it's important to realize that our health consequences, our health crisis, are not going to be solved by continuing to push people under the rug. In fact, they're made worse. If we're talking about serious health risks in an encampment area, then we need to step into that area and bring the resources that people need. And when we're talking about these fears, I see my time's almost up. When we're talking about the fears around folks being sued for helping people, we need to step back a few notches, realize first off that we already have existing law against harassment in this city, and no one has been sued for helping someone on the streets, and are already existing laws against harassment. And second off, that the response that we need here is not police pushing people around. It's, oh, there's somebody who's having a medical emergency. We need to step in and help this medical emergency. So let's start thinking about things in terms of public health and safety that has to do with humanity, and stop thinking about police and criminalization and out there away as an answer to this problem.
Okay, and our last speaker is Don Howard with the Disability Community Coalition. Something.
Hi, I'm Don Howard. I'm the lead community organizer for the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, and you may be wondering why I'm here. We work for the social justice of all people with disabilities 10% of Coloradoans have a significant disability, and I'm not one of those. So even though I have an obvious disability, it's like, so there are more than 10% of the state have a disability. Why do I care? Because over half of homeless folks have a disability. And let me tell you the current reality of what people with disabilities live on. I'm not $771 in 2019 if they have worked less than 10 years. Well, how about those people who have a work history? $1,200 a month total, and that's 2019 figures. So, is it any surprise that half of the people who are on the streets are homeless? Shelters that are older aren't accessible. So disability is a big factor. And imagine trying to live with a psychiatric disability. We need compassion. We know 300 is not the solution. But until Denver comes up with a real plan to solve the problem, let's give people their constitutional rights to exist with dignity. Because, let me tell you, people with disabilities aren't othered. We may look to try to do it, but let me tell you, if any of us were in a car accident tonight, we could become part of that 500,000 Coloradoans with significant disabilities. Let's have compassion, and let's think about the facts. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to bring up the panel and then open the questions to the floor. So here's 4 chairs sitting here. Aaron Goldhamer, are you still here? Good. Ian Tafoya. Dennis Gallagher. And Hank or Steve?
I'll move up front if somebody wants to address the question.
Hank's going to sit up there.
That's fine.
Okay.
One more chair right here.
All righty.
Hank has been selected to represent us. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of your questions that you ask, limit them to 1 minute. Please ask questions and not make statements. Afterwards, we invite you to stay following the meeting, if you'd like, so you can learn more about the issues.
And you should direct the question to the person that they want to answer.
Yes, and then the question that you're asking, direct it to who you want to answer the question. So, do we have takers? We're in a safe spot, so.
Ian, I'm going to ask you this question, and because I think you know the answer, and if anybody else knows, you can answer as well. But my husband and I talk about this issue all the time, and think that, you know, if there were just even to start with a campground that had showers, toilets, laundry facilities, a warm room, and a pee-pee lady that was in charge, that can help immediately. Is something like that been tried in Denver before?
Do we have 2 mics, by chance?
Do I have another mic? That's your okay.
Well, I guess there's 2 things to say. One, like I said, the Suburban Conservation Corps, you've mentioned charities, actually constructed several things like this to build and construct red rocks and to build other trails in the mountain parks. Beyond that, Denver Homeless Out Loud and advocates like me have been fighting to access just to the rec centers for people so that they can shower. We've been fighting for public restrooms, though we haven't been successful as we want. Now, I have been to the Parks Board and I have said to them, we have campgrounds in the mountains, there's no reason why we can't do the same thing. And I believe that if or when this passes, we want to invite everybody back to the table to say, what are the solutions? And I've seen a lot of people come out against, I've never seen at a housing meeting in my life. I'm going to say I welcome you to the conversation, and let's get to work and making the answers happen. And so I think we can definitely leverage the Parks Board. They just passed 2A, which created a whole host of money to build something just like this.
And just from a point of view of history, in the Depression, Berkeley Park and Rocky Mountain Park had little camps where people could actually camp. And I can remember my grandparents talking about visiting people who were in those camps, who were formerly friends and neighbors. So that was no solution either, I got to tell you. And hasn't the administration and the council got us in a terrible mess that this is the solution? And it's like some of them said, this is not a solution. This is a sort of a stopgap barber or Band-Aid measure. So you got my view.
Okay. Any other questions? We get to the back first. Whose hand up? Yours?
I am very concerned about what I consider this current city administration's lack of responsiveness to many things, many social issues among them. And I was interested in your data that showed the voting record of city council and the mayor on these issues of that you refer to the fact that the homeless issue has been underfunded abysmally. And I'm sort of contacting you right now personally because I'd like to contact you about the specifics of those. Yeah. And I'd like to fight for an administration that is responsive to these social issues. This one is not.
Let me just respond quickly. We did not analyze any voting patterns. There were no voting patterns that we could find. It was more like benign neglect. Remember that term, benign neglect, where you just let things fall apart, and that's exactly what this current administration did, especially with the Homeless Commission. They didn't. It's like Ian said. They didn't even ask the current who's ever left on it what they thought about this, and that was exactly. They fell apart. And talk about funding. They couldn't tell you where they put their funding. I think it was $63 million that they couldn't tell us where it went. Now, I think you could do a lot of good for the homeless with $63 million, but this administration was not able to come up with.
What's the document you mentioned, page 26?
Here, you can have a copy of it. I'll give it to you. It's the audit we did on the homeless on the road home. I'll give this to you. You better read that over. It's got all the information. And it predicted exactly where we are today. I feel like a prophet in his own kingdom.
If you would contact me.
Yeah, here. Well, you just, here, email me. Here's my card, my retirement card.
All right.
And
perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, my question is twofold. One, with the lineup of folks who are opposed to this thing, my question would be, why would they support this, especially like places like Homeless Coalition and whatnot, when this is going to lead to the solution, to solving the problem? That means on the flip side, they would be voting against their own interests, wouldn't they, if they're not for this? Or if they're for this, they'd be out of business. There'd be no need for them. So why would they do this to themselves, is one. And two, for you, Dennis, this is for you here. We approved this thing, okay? And other municipalities around doesn't have this kind of ordinance. Doesn't that become an immediate magnet for their homeless populations to come to Denver to exacerbate the situation that we have here? And in that being a possibility, does not these municipal governments, regional governments, meet so that they can figure out strategies of how to help each other out and kind of like, work with this thing? Because the truth is, man, it's like, the truth is that this ain't gonna fix the homeless situation. And it is a step in the right direction to humanize the problem instead of criminalize the problem. It's gonna cost us a whole lot more money on down the road for everybody, because once this starts happening, there's one thing that you cannot stop, and that is the desperation of people not to commit crimes to survive.
So the first question was,
Ian, why would they be for it when it's going to put them out of business?
If they were for it. Yeah.
Well, that's a fascinating question. I think that there are many nonprofits who gain grants from the government and get put in precarious situations to take votes or actions that they normally won't. Now, I can't speak on behalf of them. I do know, correct me if I'm wrong, someone in the audience, that the executive director of the coalition actually signed our petition.
My petition.
So he actually signed the petition, but collectively they organized and made a decision to write a response. I don't read it as blatantly opposed. They want to find a middle ground with solutions that continue to drive $60 million in funding to them, and that seems pretty obvious. They are the ones who have got the majority of the money. The other thing that I would point out is these low-income tax credits to build affordable housing. Denver Housing Authority has not constructed as many as the nonprofit developers have. And many of the privatized companies who get access to these deal these in secondary derivative markets. We just had a whole profile about this on Frontline last week, and they said, perhaps we need to rethink using the private sector to build public housing and to build it and put it into nonprofits whose entire mission is to build housing and solely housing. And then, your second question, yeah, we do have a regional council of governments who's failing us on air quality, who's failing us on transportation solutions, who's failing us on housing solutions. It's an organization that does not have very many teeth, though it makes up 57 governments. There are other examples in other regions like Seattle and Portland who have stronger ones. I mean, Chicago has a strong Dr. Cog or regional council of governments, I think you're hitting it right on the head. This is a regional problem. The homeless may come here and they may go. The other thing you need to realize is that these other municipalities are facing huge issues because we're forcing the homeless out of our jurisdiction and into Lakewood and into Adams County, and we're increasing their costs. And so I think, much like we have a regional transportation district, perhaps we should be discussing regional housing solutions. And I want to be clear, at the state level, we're starting to have this conversation. I have no faith that the federal government is going to bring any resources our way. And in response to crisis, we are in a crisis. We need to provide public, really available sanitation to avoid the health crisis he's describing. And if climate disaster happens, well, you better believe we're going to have problems.
Okay, so
hand the mic over to.
Wait a minute. I wanted Dennis to address this.
Well, we're going to take
I just want to respond briefly, just real fast to your question. Most of the data that Bridget presented was from the 1980s.
It was not.
Well,
some of it was 218, 217, 216.
Bridget, you don't know what I'm going to say. Why don't you just be quiet for a second?
I have spent weeks putting together this data.
What I was going to say was alcoholism, drug abuse, homelessness have been around for eons. The idea that it's going to go away is crazy. The question is, what are we going to do to help people? My objection is, it doesn't help shelter, it doesn't help safety, it doesn't help health. But we need to do something better.
So what would you suggest, Steve?
What would you suggest?
I think there have been a number of proposals for housing. One has been not to let the developers skate on the money that they're supposed to be putting into affordable housing. One of the other things has been to set aside separate housing within the shelters for LGBTQ people and couples and groups like that I think are underserved. There's also a proposal to make like dorm rooms and little efficiencies. I think that also has merit to it. There's a lot of different things that can be proposed, but I do think something needs to be done.
I just want to respond about how this doesn't increase any safety for anybody. It certainly increases the safety for the people who need to survive the elements, without a doubt. Because now they know that they can survive the elements without fear of being woken in the middle of the night and having them be mistaken. So I do think it does improve their safety. That sort of housing you're talking about was something that was created in the early 1800s as boarding houses. I think those are great solutions as well. My question, not just to you, but esoterically to everybody who says this isn't the right answer, we can do better. In 8 years, we haven't done better. In 18 years, we haven't done better. And if a new council or old council, we might be missing our one-winner opportunity to push their hand in a way like the Green Roofs did, or marijuana policy, or any of these other citizen-led initiatives who are responding to the failures of government.
Okay. So Dennis, the question, this is basically a budget question. Okay. In your audit, what was the relationship to cost versus benefit in terms of overhead expenses versus actual money going to the homeless people to solve the problem?
Well, we actually looked at the total amount of money that was given over to homeless programs in Denver. I think it added up to $63 million, and they couldn't even tell us where they were, what they were doing with it. Don't you think that would be a great accounting thing, that somebody could say, here's how many units we made? And again, how many are chronically mentally ill? You got a lot of the chronically mentally ill out there who are schizophrenic, who hear voices, and who are dangerous to themselves or others, who are in a lot of this. I was going to ask, what is the percentage of chronically mentally ill in this population? And again, it just shows you the benign neglect that the current administration and council have given us in dealing with this. If this doesn't make it, do you think they're going to convene a panel to try to figure out what to do? I don't think so. Does that sound like an administration and council that's interested in actually doing something? They're holding their breaths and hoping that it doesn't go anywhere. But it's sort of like the Tabor Amendment. Remember Tabor? Oh, don't vote for Tabor. Citizens finally voted for Tabor. And even though the Gallagher Amendment was reacted differently to it, and I tried to warn people, nobody listened. So, but anyway, that's the mess we're in. It's sort of will. Do we have people of goodwill to try to solve these solutions? I'm not sure we were there.
So, Gallagher, how much did the executive director for the Homeless Coalition, how much money does he make a year?
The Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, the last figure I saw is about $157,000.
What?
That's pretty good.
My question for Steve. Talking about hepatitis, obviously it seems to me that people living on the street is part of the problem that you were describing. How does 300 make hepatitis worse than having people on the street right now? They're going to be there regardless of whether you're not going away, and we still have the hepatitis problem as you so described. Please explain.
I'm not sure I understand.
There are homeless people living on the street now, whether 300 passes or not. They're still going to be there, correct?
I'd like to see less homeless people on the street.
But whether it passes or not, the population is there, and you link that to the hepatitis problem. I'd just like to know how that changes whether 300 passes or not. You kind of assume that with 300 passing, there'll be a greater problem with hepatitis.
I think it will be a greater problem because people will be able to form encampments and they'll become established and there'll be more sanitation problems. And that's been the pattern in cities throughout. It's been the pattern in San Diego, it's been the pattern in LA, it's been the pattern in Portland, it's been the pattern in Seattle. I see us importing solutions that have never been shown to work. And I would be in favor of importing solutions from other cities where they have found things that work. I mean, you can look at some of the things that have been done with some of the PTSD veterans, for example, which have a very high incidence of drug abuse in some of the Texas communities. I think there are examples of housing. And I think housing first as a philosophy works. I think the question, the problem that I see is that this does not really get people any shelter. They're still living in tents. They're still living on the street. I think people shouldn't be on the street in our society. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we got plenty.
Was there a hand back there?
Yeah, but if you want to respond.
Oh, I'm no public health expert. The one thing I did want to amend with my previous comments, I know this is a very park-focused group. The handout that was the presentation from the city attorney's office concerning park curfews. The authority of the parks manager is enshrined in the Denver Charter, not in the municipal code. From my understanding, and the city was very reliant on that majestic authority in the charter, which is like our Constitution rather than just laws that kind of come and go. But the authority that's in the charter for the parks manager to regulate the parks and close the parks and establish curfews as the manager sees fit, I think it would be unaffected by passage of an ordinance, which this goes in the code because the charter is our Constitution above that. Just wanted to throw that out.
Can I just add something too? And just to comment, I meant to bring this up when I was speaking. I think everything we do should try to bring people to sobriety. I mean, putting people in even a small unit who are totally dependent on alcohol or drugs, they'll be selling the bathroom furniture to try to get more drugs. I come from a long line of alcoholics, and it took forever to reform them. And I think everything we should do should have that as a goal. Call me old-fashioned, but
the bathroom?
I just want to say for 1 second though, I agree with you that we have drug and psychological issues rampant in our society. But I believe we need to break down the veil that every single person experiencing homelessness has one of those two issues. I think there are many people who do. But when we blanketly say these people are crazy or sick or addicted, that's othering rather than saying they have a problem and that's not housing. Right. And until we can find housing, I don't want them to freeze to death.
Freezing to death, that's one way of getting sober.
That's sometimes why you drink.
I've been a long-time Denver resident, and I am increasingly disturbed by the not in my world view of many citizens in this city who do not want to see poverty. They don't want it in their world, they don't want it in their parks, they don't want it on the sidewalks downtown. It just shouldn't be in their world. And I guess my question is for Aaron or Ian, do you see any way that we can talk to these people to get them to be more compassionate or helpful to people in need?
I don't have an answer.
I'm not sure I do either. I do want to say that the language that we use surrounding homelessness, I think, is important because, and we haven't necessarily hammered on this tonight, but when we refer to the homeless, there's a certain dehumanization in that use of language. And I think that we, just like we don't, I don't at least like referring to illegals or, illegal immigrants. These are people with some sort of immigration status documentation issue. They're people first. And so at least the primary use of language on this issue with respect to people experiencing homelessness, I think is at least a good start because it puts the emphasis on the humanity and the people first. Because, like Ian mentioned, there can be a tendency to have the othering kind of language out there. Is that going to solve the problem? Probably not. But at least it's one thing in this discussion that I wanted to throw out there.
I want to say that we're already beginning the dialogue, aren't we? It's been 8 years, and we haven't been able to move the button one goddamn bit. And now even our opponents are saying we can do better, right? And so it's our chance to bring in public health officials and say, public health education and supervised injections, public restrooms and water fountains, education are certainly going to have to be a part of the process moving forward. And so I want to say we've already built that bridge, and I want to also say that as a representative and a person who supports 300, we will continue to not be scared, but compassionate and genuinely treat our opponents with compassion and say, let's come back to the table, we have to.
I want to speak out for diversity. I think the homeless problem is really diverse, complex. Many people don't have just one thing going on. They're alcohol, and they have drug abuse, and they have chronic health problems. Some people are working. I think the number was 40%. That means 60% aren't.
40% of children of homeless under 5.
I think that there's a lot of, most people, it depends on the study you read, but the chronic homeless population is around 50% of, in terms of drug abuse and alcoholism and things like that. Some people put it higher. And I think that that's one group that requires different solutions than the people who are not getting paid enough wages to rent a place for the week or whatever. I think that people who don't feel safe because of domestic violence or because of their sexual orientation, deserve a different solution. I think they all need to have, you need to look at what the needs are of the individual, but I think we're always going to have less fortunate members of our society who we need to reach out and to help. But enabling people is not helping them. And my concern is that I think that this ordinance has the risk of creating an environment of indifference and feeding into exactly what you're talking about and moving people out of sight rather than an expression of compassion, which I think is really where we need to be motivated from.
I want to say if people somewhere in this printed material, if you haven't watched the video, Seattle is dying. One of the very bad things to me reported in that video is that the Seattle police officers are pretty much saying, I won't bother. So if we're going to worry about people's blankets being taken away, I think we need to worry about Denver police saying, well, maybe the guy is passed out, maybe he's OD'd, maybe he is freezing, but why would I go bother him? And I think it's a powerful video. Seattle is dying. It's on YouTube, and I'd recommend that you watch it.
I had a chance to watch that documentary, mostly because I saw it posted recently, and I think there's some interesting things in there, but I also think the kind of music you choose builds into fear, which I saw in that movie. They also decided to pick out 100 criminals who were homeless and decide that their rising property crimes were directly related to homeless. And I feel like that was a very, very, very flawed analysis.
Could I say something?
Yeah, we need
Thank
to move
you.
on.
I would like to say something.
I would like to say that the focus on the subgroups, the alcoholics, which we have a lot of them who are living in our neighborhoods in houses.
People with alcohol.
Right, and the drug addicts. We have a lot of drug
addiction issues.
Right, but homeless people have no place where they can do these things privately. Focusing on the subgroups of homeless, the addicts, the drunks, the people with mental problems, perhaps even the veterans, is to ignore the much larger problem, the millions and millions of other people who are homeless, who just are there because they had a misfortune, they were flooded, they lost a job, domestic violence, whatever it is. And so we can all just focus on those poor few sickos, or we can address the larger problem. So that's what I have to say. And then my question for Aaron is, to get into the zoo, don't you have to pay a fee? I mean, do homeless people have the money to buy a ticket to get into the zoo so they can camp with the tigers?
Speech!
That is true. The initiative refers to areas that are accessible to the public. And certainly public buildings, the zoo, are closed during certain times. The parks are closed during certain times. So I don't see quite the parade of horribles that has been suggested is going to ensue on some of these spaces and the use of those spaces. So I think, you know, with any new law, there's always going to be issues of interpretation. There's going to be issues of follow-up tweaking, perhaps, and I see it being unlikely that you're going to see an enshrinement of the right to be in the zoo all the time, or the enshrinement of the right to be in the parks all the time, because those, sort of by definition, are not accessible to the public all the time.
Okay. Sally?
We had more than 200 die on the streets this year in our city. Do you think this ordinance going through would increase that or decrease it?
Who wants to answer the question?
per se. I think it will increase it.
I'm not sure, but I think that letting people have blankets and other ways of covering themselves, protecting themselves, certainly poses an intuitive ability to protect from the elements to a certain extent.
Okay. Again, I can't say one way or another, but his intuitiveness is right. I also can hear what he's saying. If a public health crisis were to exist, but again, education, I would say that with the passage of this, it will allow us to put the mental capacity of all those who have been fighting just to pass this to work on our other solutions. And I also believe it will empower our solutions with those that are saying, oh shit, we have to do something about this. Which hopefully will result in better public health outcomes and more housing creation.
Yeah, I can't guess whether fatalities would go up or down, but I will say, recycling makes us feel good about using the same amount of plastic that we always have used. And 300 is going to be making us feel good about, well, it passed. And I'm sorry, I still don't see it going up or down for too many people.
I'm not sure. That's where you sure need some good analysis, which we asked for from all these commissions at the city that they couldn't even give us good answers on even that question.
Therese might have an answer there.
Therese, maybe.
Okay. So you and then okay.
She wants to change my question.
We got
So I have a comment and a question. So I understand that in Paris, France, they actually opened up a lot of their cathedrals.
They do, and they do the metro as well.
Well, these people who are homeless get to stay there, and these huge cathedrals, and there's another place for them to sleep. So if there's international solutions to homelessness, there needs to be opportunities to be searched at. But my question is about how do we have a society in America where the compassion of people has been funneled into a place of mean-hearted, cold-hearted human beings who are not sensitive to the fact that there will always be poor people in the world. We know this, but the society we live in, if we're going to be progressive, is that what do we do to make sure everyone has a chance to sit down, to sleep, to eat? I saw the documentary. I saw this woman who was homeless, and she was on this documentary. I think DHO is a part of it. But the one thing that struck me is the fact that she said, all I want to do is sleep. I cannot sleep. I have not slept in 6 hours or 24 hours. I can't sleep. So this, I'm hearing about $65 million in Denver. Nobody knows what happened to it in Denver City and County. What is going on that amount of money is not accounted for, and no one, these people are questioning what other checks and balances can be in place so that a large sum of money, like $65 million, can be used to help these people who are not able to help themselves. We need to have compassion. If we want to talk about peace and justice, we need to know, I know that peace is, to me, is love and harmony and compassion. And when I think about justice, it's about moral and righteous and ethical behavior. We cannot be in this city and look around and not have compassion and justice for poor people. And what are we going to do about it? What is going on besides this referendum? Who wants to answer that question?
I can answer part of it. One, which is just to clear the deck in city council.
Yes.
Get some community folk in there.
Vote for Lamone.
Find the money, find the bank accounts, and put them in jail.
question. I had a question for Dennis. Ramon, I had a question for Dennis. Let's go short.
Yeah.
Are we going to go till 9:30?
My understanding is that right now, I just want you to imagine 5 degrees outside. And right now, the way it stands, the police can come and take somebody's blanket off of them while it's 5 degrees outside. I'd like to know who would join them and rip those blankets off of these people sleeping on the street. Isn't that what we're talking about? To try to stop that? Isn't that the intention of 300 is? So that these people don't freeze to death on our watch as we say it's okay? The police go out there and do this? I just don't understand it.
Anybody want to
Maybe
answer
somebody
that?
wants to answer that.
Patrice could answer.
Aaron might want to answer
Oh, you've been waiting a while, so.
I was just going to answer the other question. So I just wanted to speak to the question about deaths because I think that's an important one. So in 2017 was the highest number of folks who were homeless who have been counted who died in any of the previous years. Our numbers keep growing, folks who die on the streets. So 2017, I'm sorry, not 2017, 2018, backwards numbers. 2018 was 251 individuals who were homeless who died on the streets of Denver. So 8 of those people died of hypothermia. That's 8 people that died due to not being able to have proper protection of the elements. There's a significant number of those folks who died due to overdose. So will this initiative stop people from dying from hypothermia or overdose or whatnot? No. Will it create opportunity for harm reduction options where people are less likely to die from hypothermia and frostbite and overdose and so on? Yes, absolutely. This is a harm reduction measure. It does not end the option, the possibility where folks can fall into extreme cold and extreme crisis, but it does create opportunity where folks are able to look out for each other in communities and help each other not overdose. The leading reason that stops people from dying from overdose is when you're with friends or community who are there to help keep you from dying. And that's one of the critical roles that it plays when folks can stay together in a community or not split apart from each other. So I don't want to belabor this point, but I think that it is important to recognize, no, this is not a solution to saving everybody's life. That's not something that we can profess to do, and we should never. But it is something that creates opportunity for people to have safer situations.
Any other questions? Oh, say cool.
Yeah. Let's go and show this. Okay, Dennis. A lot of people forget that you were the city council for a long time. How many years? 8 years city councilman before you came to Washington. Okay, so here we go. This thing passes. Okay? And now, without a regime change, for real, in the mayor's office and a majority vote on city council, what's to stop the current incumbents who may have a majority rule on city council and you come back with a Michael hand up, all right? What's going to stop them from tweaking this thing like they did the taper amendment?
Or the Green Initiative.
Yeah, I'm saying, what's going to stop them? What's going to stop them?
Citizens objecting at every turn, but I don't see that. And I think you're exactly right. I think they will do exactly like they did on the Green Initiative. Even if it passes, they'll just benignly neglect it. And I'm sorry to say that, but that's what I think they'll do.
Okay, so
one legal.
All right. So to make that not happen, okay, then it seems to me the real issue around this whole homeless thing and this and that and the other is really about land and it's about power. And you don't have no poor folks in city council now. You ain't never had no poor folks as the mayor. You ain't never had no poor folks in the State House and all the way up to the White House. So, without poor people assuming the power positions, then this right here that we're talking about has no protective aspects of it. And then even if you pass it, it ain't worth a bucket of spit because ain't nobody going to do it. And then in the process, all of this activity is only going to disappoint the hopes of the homeless people because it's all done all over again. And then we keep going over and over again, every 10, every 20 years, like the Voting Rights Act, where black people are the only folks who got to get their citizenship renewed every 20 years.
Well, and you're right, and the people downtown, the big lobbyists and the millionaires sit around and actually talk about this. They talk about, well, if this passes, how can we minimize it? You know, like they did on the Green Initiative. So, again, you're absolutely right. I don't see at this point yet a roused citizenry that would raise holy hell about anything that goes through. I wish I could offer you some hope, but.
Well, you can answer, but I'm the only poor man running for the mayor, Jack, and we're going to stop this shit.
I hope so.
The good chairman, thankfully there's at least going to be 6 months from passage, after which it cannot be touched whatsoever. So under the Denver Charter, the right of initiative is enshrined to the extent that if it passes, it will be law, period, for 6 months. After that, then City Council can tweak it. So I think the fact that it goes into effect immediately will be at least one way for people to see what the immediate effects are or are not, and will let people at least be able to hold their council people accountable to the greatest extent possible based on that 6-month trial. Thankfully, as well, we did pass through citizen initiative, or actually a referred measure that started as a citizen initiative, the Democracy for the People question, which reformed campaign finance laws for the local elections. So, they do not go into effect this cycle, but for the 2023 cycle, you are going to see some public matching funds to support small dollar donations in the campaign finance system, which will help. It will not eliminate the influence of big money in our local elections that tends to favor not poor people, but it will help even the playing field to a certain extent. The more grassroots candidates who will be able to have their small dollar donations from human beings in Denver matched with public funds.
Did you hear what you just said? You said this thing stays in effect for 6 months, then all bets are off. Now, what do you think the opposition is going to be doing for the 6 months and this incubation period? And you got a presidential election coming up within the next 4 months?
What are we going to be doing for those 6 months?
Are you serious?
Yeah. So I hear you. It's not great. It's not enough time to see how it works. But it will at least be a way to see what happens out of the gate, and if it does what the proponents are intending to do, then hopefully there will be good results that people can say to their electeds, you can't touch this. Hopefully. I hear you. I'm sure there will be big money coming for it.
I just want to say, as a person who worked on the Green Roof Initiative, I was a deputy. They came to the table and we found an ordinance, we found some middle ground. They wrote the city and asked them to illegally halt the implementation of the ordinance, which is a violation of the charter. And Kendra Black even wrote about it for a second time in the editorial. So yeah, there's influence. And yeah, the charter stood up to it. Yeah, there's going to be an opportunity for us all to come back to the table. But I want to be clear, if this thing loses, they're just going to take it to constitutional court and we're going to win there. The case law is there. It just wastes a lot of
How long is that going to take? How many years is that going to take? Can a Republican court?
One more question.
Georgia. It's one another place.
There was a time in our history, and it's been referred to here, where people came together and voted for FDR. And he instituted the WPA and the Citizens Conservation Commission. And it was a wonderful thing, and this can happen. This is political. This is a terrible administration. I call them from the haute degree. We need to start in this room, in my opinion, a movement to get into people in our administration. Lamone Knowles is running for Council City 8 against Chris Burton, who is doing a terrible job for our people. There are other candidates, but at least tonight, I've loved hearing these people of compassion, and I think everyone here is that. It's difficult in the end. I think that 300 is flawed. I would like to wait and get some people in government that I trusted and have real change. Anyway, that's a thought.
So what was supposed to be a form turned into a debate?
Right.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah.
That's Bridget's. Come on, that's Bridget's.
Is it all done?
It's not. You just want to off on the side there.
Okay.
You gonna give it to me?
That was a good audit.
Thanks.